Forging Human Connection podcast. This is a space where we explore the unseen threads that bind us all together. And I'm one of your hosts, Luke W. Russell, and then I'm joined by Julia Metz and PJ Livingston. Hey, you two.
Hey, Luke.
Hey.
PJ.
All right, so everybody, today in this episode, we're going to be diving into the topic that plagues so many of us in our pursuit of joy, and that is perfectionism. And maybe you're like some people who are like, wait, hold on. Perfectionism, really? Like, how is striving for excellence a bad thing? Let me tell you, perfectionism is so much more than just aiming for the best. It's a belief that if we live, look, and do everything perfectly, we can somehow avoid or escape shame, judgment, and blame. And that's a trap. And so instead of leading us towards happiness, it often keeps us shackled to our fears and our insecurities. So today we're going to just peel back these layers on this mindset and discover how we've embraced our own perfections to unlock joy, connection, and authenticity in our life to be able to forge those rich connections. So let's jump in. I was thinking about this topic and I was curious, when did you realize you were a perfectionist? So one of you can take that first.
I'll go. So I was actually clinically diagnosed as a perfectionist by a therapist about 12 years ago. And I left that office thinking that person was nuts because if you see my desk and you see the clutter that's on my desk, then I can't be a perfectionist. What I didn't realize until later on, after doing my own journey of learning, is that there's, like you said, Luke, there's a lot of different levels of perfectionism. And the one that I am dealing with and consistently struggle with is that if it's not perfect, then I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That
and so I'm trying to lean into right now imperfect actions and imperfect situations. And it's a learning process. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Julia?
So I was a kid, right? I mean, my sister Marcia used to tell me that I was going to stroke out by the time I was 30, because I've always been. I want everything to be perfect. I want everything to be the best that it can be. I wanted everything to be the best. If we were going to do something as a family, then it needed to be the best. If I was going to host the holidays, they were going to be the best, and it was going to be perfect. And it started very, very early on. And then so much to like PJ's point, though, later in my life, whenever I was diagnosed with ADHD, right? And so when I hit a wall in life and burnout and shame and all of those things, because I couldn't just outwork myself and my mind anymore, right? So the perfectionist shield was crumbling around me. And I was falling into the analysis paralysis. I was falling into that inaction trap. I was falling into that shame and self-loathing. And that came much later in my life. But it's such a hard thing because when you are a perfectionist, society celebrates your disease, right? Society will run you into the ground while you're chasing. And it becomes an addiction that is societally acceptable. If I would have drank as much as I was striving to be perfect, then I would have been like Marchman acted against my will. But because I picked a socially acceptable demon, so to speak, people allowed me to do it until it became impossible for me anymore.
Ooh, yeah. I was told when I was 19 years old, I went through a leadership training and one of my coaches goes, Luke, you're a perfectionist. And at the time I was like, what are you talking about, Steve? And I don't know when I really clicked with it, but it's
Yeah.
been over somewhere in recent years when I was like, wait a second, I started to see the signs of like, because if you look around, I'm not worried about certain things being perfect. And also like personality wise, I'm often that person who's like, let's just jump and go. So I still am taking action. And so when we talk about the paralysis, and I don't see that in my behavior the same way. However, what I think for me, and I don't know if I've fully processed all of it yet, but perfectionism comes down to this like, what I do only counts if
Yes.
it meets this box, if it meets that. So I might still take the action, but then I feel crummy about it. I can't celebrate it, or I don't celebrate it because I'm like, well, it wasn't, I wanted 10 and I got 2. And so what I did was a failure rather than like I did it and I got 2 out of 10. Like that was my first time. Instead, it's just see like if it wasn't, was it even worth it if I'm not going to do it perfectly? And so it's that hindsight. Like I go out, I do stuff, and then I feel shame or embarrassment or like, oh man, see, like I'm not good enough because it didn't meet whatever metric or goal in the process.
I wonder how much of that is, we've been talking a lot recently, like you and I, Luke, about belonging versus fitting in, right? I wonder how much of, as I'm sitting here thinking, my own perfectionist tendencies is a deep need to belong, right? To be accepted, and work in this country is a way to be accepted. So when they don't, when my family and my teachers and no one knew what to do with people like me, they knew what to do with my work product, right? And they knew they couldn't question that shit. so so I found a way to be perfectly undeniable,
Say more.
while still not being who I am, right? If I can create a work product and experiences and all of these things, that are perfect, then they'll accept me. They'll love me, only to understand in the end they're loving this version that I'm giving them, and that's not the version that I love about me. Right? Like the thing that I love about me isn't that I can outwork people. The thing that I love about me is that I care about people.
How old
Right?
were you when that clicked?
I honestly, I that thought I just had right now.
I love
I
that.
mean, like
Yeah.
I'd never connected
Wow.
until Luke was just talking about his, and I'm sitting, so I'm looking at all of us on the screen, and I'm just thinking that we have all at some point been pushed to the side and marginalized and
Absolutely.
had our identities othered. And I wonder if that's one of the things that made us want to make our work perfect, because in this country, your work is your worth.
You know what? That triggers some emotions and some thoughts that so my parents grew up in the deep South during the Jim Crow era.
Wow.
And so they instilled in me and my 2 brothers a philosophy referred to as twice as equal. And what that means is if you wanted equal treatment, you had to be twice as good. And so it's not until you just connected those dots for you that I didn't connect those dots for me. Like, wow, that's been a huge driver. And it's an external thing, but it's been internalized that in order to have equal status, professionally or whatever the case may be, that I needed to be twice as good.
Yeah.
Man,
How does that feel, sitting with that right now?
Man,
I have chills.
it's very, very powerful. And I'm thinking about myself and my 2 brothers, um, and we've all professionally done well, and now we have kids that are excelling, and I realize that we have absolutely passed that on. and verbally and non-verbally. And so that's the thing that's hitting me now is that, okay, how do I stop that? There's a couple things. One, there is a certain level of reality to that, but there's a certain level of story to that as well.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, okay, what could I have accomplished? What could I have done emotionally if I had followed understood the story part as opposed to internalizing it as a reality. And I'm sitting with that right now, and ask me that again in 10 minutes.
Or tomorrow.
Yeah.
What for you in the journey of this, like seeing perfectionism as this like thought pattern, this driving behavior for you? Like, what are some moments in which I would say maybe there was like, oh, I see how I can start to pivot this into a space that still is beautiful for me? Like how, like, because in that journey, because like eventually, because what I'm thinking right now is like eventually we get to the space, or maybe toward the space of like letting it go, hopefully before I die. I don't know if I'll do that. If I die tomorrow, I didn't make it, but which sounds really morbid thing. Anyways, but this idea, like before we get to this, like thoughts of how we move toward that future, I'm thinking like let's look at what are some steps or things we've done in the recent years or over the years that have just started to help you maybe like coexist, have both the like perfectionist tendency while the like, you know what, let me also let it go. And because I don't think it just happens where, and this is probably, it's what a perfectionist thing to think is like, we need to fully let it go perfectly.
You'd be perfect about letting it go.
Right. Versus like there's like most of us are probably, once we realize we're perfectionists, it's probably like a lifelong journey of like letting it go, and it doesn't just stop.
Wow, that's deep.
All right, I'll go first then. So listen, journaling and getting quiet. And what it does is, and I mean like reflective journaling on your behavior during the day. So like once you have the moment where you're like, this could be an issue. Okay, cool. How do I pivot? How do I shift? And the moment that it could be an issue for me was Justin, my nephew, who's now 18, was 4 or 5, and he dropped his bowl of oatmeal. And he looked at me and said, I had an accident. And I looked at him and said, son, we don't have accidents. That's a failure to execute. And my partner, Julie, at the time pulled me aside and she said, Julia, no. She says, we don't do this to babies. Like we don't. Wow. Like he had an accident. And I looked at her and I said, Julie, there are no accidents in life. There are failures to execute, and he failed to execute, and he needs to understand that. Like just because he's had a difficult upbringing to this point doesn't mean that we are going to coddle him. And like she walked away from me. And I remember just being like adamant that like I had to toughen him up for the world, right? Because the world wasn't going to do him any favors, especially given where he came from. And sitting with that all day and for the next couple of days, because she didn't speak to me, which is very, very unlike her. And then that on repeat, like we don't do this to babies. Mm. And then I remember her coming back to me and saying, you are not your father. And like that, oof, that was the wake up, right? Like you are not your father. And then I'm like, okay. And then from there, it's been like nonstop journaling on the behaviors and the things that I do, and then what's driving them, right? So if I want to do something next in life, right, then okay, great. Why do I want it? Do I want it to prove that I can, or do I want it because it's filling some piece of me? Do I want it for external validation, or do I want it because it's something that really adds value to my life, though? So I'm not chasing external validation and perfection anymore. But it is a daily journaling and quiet in my brain for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing that.
I've got I got some questions that um
I don't know if I have answers.
no, is your journaling, is it prompted journaling, or is it just you just sit down and write whatever's on your head, or how does that work for you?
Both. So I have,
Okay.
I do the daily Stoic journal every morning and evening, which is a prompted journal from like Stoic philosophy, Ryan Holiday. And I have journals everywhere I go. And anytime, so PJ, if I'm on a call earlier and something happens and goes sideways and I'm in my head about it, I'll take 5 minutes, I'll open a journal and I'm like, all right, Julia, this is what you're thinking. This is what's going on. And this is how we're going to work ourselves out of it. And I go through that. And then in the evenings, I do a reflective journaling about what went well today and what I could have done to be a better partner and a better parent. Like that part changes based on where I am in life. Right. So my primary concern right now is being a supportive partner and a good parent, because the boys are in different phases than they were before. 2 years ago, it was, what am I doing to work towards my goal of being a trial lawyer and things like that. But I journal in the evenings on the values and priorities in my life at the time.
What I am, it's funny. I'm just, in all transparency, I have a lot of unfinished journals because I realize that I'm trying to journal perfectly.
Listen,
if I can't journal perfectly,
yeah,
then I'm just not going to finish. I'm just not going to journal. And so what I'm working through right now is changing my perception of the outcome. And it really clicked for me when my youngest daughter, who's now 23, back when she was like 8 or 9, she started playing travel softball. And we're traveling all over the country, and it's very expensive. But I'd been working with her on all the things that my dad had like pumped into me: good, better, best, never let it rest. Your good gets better and your better is the best. Excuses are the tools of the incompetent. Those who use them only build monuments of nothing. All these things,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And my daughter hit the ball deep, and the center fielder ran and caught it. And she turned back. She must have been like 10 at that time. She turned back and said, "Dad, they got tryouts too." Yeah, they do. That kid worked just as hard as you did, probably, and it really helped me. It really started me on this journey of, okay, control the things you can control.
Yep.
Like literally, once you, from a softball standpoint, once you make contact with the ball, it's no longer within your control. There's way too many variables. So that's what I'm working through now. And again, it's been a long time of still working through it. Of, okay, control the things I can control. Instead of needing a perfect outcome, I just want an outcome. And and set that as the expectation that for version 1 is better than better than version none, kind of thing. And so that is really driving me right now in my growth.
I love that.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny. I asked the question. It's a question I've been thinking about all day, and I find myself like, oh man, what has been some of those steps in my early steps in my journey of this? And I think one thing, listening to both of you, that I do that's just been helping me center is thinking about like what really matters to me, what's really important to me, and then am I spending my time on those? And because it's so easy for me, because I made the step last year to actually downsize my company after spending years of chasing my friends who were all grow bigger, 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 bigger. And for me, the measurement of success was through the perfect execution of the growth thing. And because we have these sayings of like, if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think it's ridiculous, like, because we're all dying. And I just don't I don't agree with that adage. And so over the years, been helpful for me. A year and a half ago, I was led through a process where I came up with my own personal mission statement. And that has, in some ways, just really helped me ground myself, because for me, like, what I love more than anything else in the world is human connection. And so if that's what I value, then, like, trust me, I still have all kinds of anxiety with my work and this and that. And I'll even tell my clients, I'm like, oh, here's what I've got anxiety about, which actually that's a huge thing. Like, that's talk about stepping out of perfectionism. I was on a call last week. So over the last month, I've had 2 different conversations with clients where I just straight up told them what I was having anxiety about in my work for them. And I've never done that in the past, because it's always like, no, like, everything's perfect over here. And versus like, no, actually, I was like freaking out about that, but like, it's going to be okay. It's just that vulnerable state of like being like, oh, hey, by the way, yes, you paid me to come in as an expert. And also I'm still over here having my own little anxiety breakdowns. And so that it's been helpful, because then too, if I'm prioritizing that human connection, like with clients, it's like, man, did I have a rich connection?
Right.
Did I have a rich interaction with somebody? Or if it's like, man, I'm going to go spend time with my kids or my friends or whatever it is, it's like, no, but that's the thing that I care about the most, versus what are the other people going to look at and say? Because I know if I just kept growing my business and scaling it the way my friends do, that would get me certain kinds of attention. And that's for me then how it's like, that's my measurement of, ooh, I did it successfully. And so that perfectionism, I think, is this like, oh man, mine only counts if it looks like that. Versus what if it just looks like Luke's, or what if it doesn't, play out the ways I hope to, or what if it, things go sideways, and that not meaning failure too. I think that's been another thing, is like changing my relationship with failure and what I view as failure. And like, I don't know that but like one of my coaches gave me this thought a while back was, what if this is the greatest thing that could have happened? Yeah. And I remember the first time I used that phrase was late, like fall 2020. And my team, that I still had at the time, they were so appreciative of it, because we had happened to us what was basically an end of business event. Like, we should be out. And I was like, you know what? Like, what if this is the best thing ever? And I don't know that it was or wasn't. I don't know how to quantify or qualify that, but that's been another tool that's been helpful to be like, oh man, this thing went sideways. It's not perfect anymore. Well, but what if that's actually better for what I really want in the end? Or I can also just go with it. So I don't know. That's been a bit of my journey with like changing that perfectionism relationship.
Look, I've got 2 other. So I wrote my obituary.
Ooh.
Right. And I had to list the 3 things that I wanted people to say. And that came after just a series of deaths in my life, like one after the other. And so, I mean, I get asked to help write the obituaries for people that I love and care about. So then I wrote my own, and then the other, so that helps me in terms of, am I doing the things today that help me be remembered in the ways that I want to be remembered? Because nowhere in there does it say, I want people to know me for this verdict or this trial or this thing, right? It's, did I leave the world better than I found it? Was I a human who added value? Was I a good mom, right? Like those sorts of things. And the 3 ebb and flow as life changes, but they're all very centered on human beings and connection, and, reducing suffering in this world. So when it helps me not chase the things that other people are chasing, because I already know what I want to be said when I die. And then the other thing I do is I remind myself every day that I'm dying, right? And what a gift it is to know that there is an end in sight, because it reminds me that I need to live today as well. We're the only dogs run around not knowing, that there actually is an end. As far as we know, we're the only species that knows of our own mortality. And then we waste what a gift it is to know that we're going to die, So like when we reframe death and we think about the fact that like, I will never take this breath again. The 3 of us will never have this same conversation again. What am I doing to be present in this moment with you 2 and to love you and to live with you? Yeah. Right. Instead of thinking about my to-do list that's coming at 5:06. Right? I'm dying, which means that I really need to live. Like, so those are the tools that I think helped me the most recently, like within the last 5 to 6 years, curb the need for external validation, which is at the root of perfectionism for me.
Yeah.
That's amazing, and that is very, very moving. Um, and as you say that, I'm thinking, I I I've treated it the other way. I've treated it that, you know, I know I'm not going to be here forever, so I need to get as much done right now. And thinking
Yeah, we
about
all have.
the fact that when it's all done, yeah, truly, if in my obituary they list my accomplishments professionally, that's really sad. I don't want that at all. That's very powerful.
Hmm.
I'm curious, when you sat down to write your obituary, did it flow, or did you have to like really think about it?
No, it was automatic. I mean,
Wow.
like uh, the rage inside of me, right? As I see it on paper, because then I have to look at it and know. And it was like it was 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep, and I had written someone else's obituary, and I'm just like, fuck it, right? What are they going to say about me? Because at that point, like I don't know if it was ego, if it was whatever, but when I started writing, what I thought would come didn't come, right?
Hmm.
Because and I know though that anytime I am in my ego and I'm thinking about myself as a trial lawyer or as this like great speaker, this whatever, I am armored up and protecting myself from what the world can do to me. But anytime I am in vulnerability, then I am just there to be shattered. And what I wrote was something that could be hurt. You know, I wasn't armored up at all. Like I wanted to be a human who helped other humans, right? And everybody can look at that and say, well, what's the measure of that? How do you know if you did it or not? And I'm like, you know it if you feel it, right? So I don't know. What I thought I would write in that angry state is not what I wrote at all. And then came the reckoning of I wasn't living my true values. So
Yeah.
like now how do I get in alignment with that?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So, with us, we got a little less than 3 minutes left. So, what I'd love to do is rather than originally, I was thinking like, what would be like if somebody's like, how do I, your number one recommendation for somebody listening? I'm like, you know what? There's so much self help stuff that tells everybody how to do things. So, here's what I'd rather ask is, what's something as we move away from this conversation that you're like, you know what, I want to work on this a little bit or think about that in the coming days, weeks, or year.
Well, the first thing that pops in my mind is I want to work on imperfect journaling. Um,
Ooh.
it is something that has worked for me, but I stopped doing it because I feel like I'm doing it wrong. And um, I didn't realize until this conversation that my perfectionism was stopping me from journaling. That's
Hmm.
one thing I'm going to do.
Yeah. What about you, Julia?
Luke, I think after this conversation, I am going to double down on being present with the people in front of me. And for me as the fake introvert. So often like when you and I are at a conference or like when we're all there, like I can make people feel like I see them, but I am not present. Like I'm not truly vulnerable. I am managing conversations so that I don't ever get tapped into in a way that I don't want to be tapped into. So I think for me moving forward is that my perfectionism shows up in the way that I control people in a group and letting go of some of that and being vulnerable in those spaces.
Ah,
Mm.
for me, I want to spend some time thinking about what it is I want to be evaluated by. Just being like, oh, like when I get anxiety about something, or like, what if this goes wrong? And be like, well, like, did I show up the way I wanted to? And that be the measure. And maybe things aren't always going to work out the way I want them to. But like, just going back to that space of valuing the showing up and not the outcome over. Like, I still pursue the outcome while valuing showing up. But So let's wrap it up. We've got 18 seconds. So thank you, PJ and Julia. This was delightful for our very first one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Thanks, PJ. This has been amazing.
Yeah, this has been I'm speechless, and that takes a lot.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna close out the stream here. Thanks everybody, and you can subscribe on the YouTube channel Forging Human Connection.